The executives leading 10 of the state's regional chambers of commerce announced last week that they are banding together to advocate for their policy and business priorities. The new initiative is being called the Chambers Policy Network. The participants represent Greater Boston, Worcester, Springfield, Western Mass, Cape Cod, the South and North Shores, the South Coast, the Berkshires, and Newton and Needham. I'm Bruce Moll from CommonWealth Magazine, and I'm joined on the podcast by the head of one of those regional chambers, James Rooney, the president and CEO of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, Bruce. Nice to be here.
Good to have you. So tell me about this policy network. How did it come about?
Well, there's a couple of ways that it came about and motivations for it. First, Massachusetts is one of very few states, less than 5, that does not have a statewide chamber of commerce that participates in advocacy and public policy. There is an organization, MACE, that is a best practices shared learning type of organization that is statewide, but they do not advocate up on Beacon Hill. Each of the members of that organization is left to do it on their own. So we're one of a few in the country that does not have that. And one of the things we've learned is that in states that do not have it, there are these types of coalitions that exist among city and regional chambers in states. And they band together and talk over public policy issues and take joint positions on issues in their capitals. So it was really just seeing that we didn't have that, and that there's a tried and true way to deal with that. A second motivation was that we felt that in Massachusetts there is a degree of fractiousness in business community advocacy, in that, for example, throughout the state, there are over 100 organizations that are registered as chambers of commerce. And as you know, Bruce, there's many more that are industry organizations or other types of business organizations here in Boston and throughout the state. So we have a lot of organizations representing the business community. But cohesive voice is something we've struggled with over time. So this is an attempt to bring together, as you said, chambers from across the state, covering every region, to, as I said, talk about policy issues and move forward with a cohesive voice.
So I'm sort of surprised this hasn't happened earlier in a way, because it would make sense, like instead of everybody speaking with their own voice, trying to, say we represent the entire state or what have you. Was there anything, that spurred this move at this moment in time?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Bruce. And I think it's that we're all feeling that Massachusetts is starting to lose its way in terms of competitiveness, not just for business, but for people. The data speaks for itself, 110,000 people leaving the state last year. So we're really concerned about the exodus of people, the climate that is leading to not just people, but businesses to look at other states to either start a business or to locate a function within a business. And feeling like our voice as a business community is not being heard as much as perhaps other voices are on Beacon Hill. So I think it is this growth in the feeling that the business voice is not as present as it needs to be and not as loud as it needs to be.
And when you talk about competitiveness, I know the governor came to one of your meetings just in the last couple of weeks and sort of presented about her budget and her tax plan, and you were generally very positive about the message she was delivering. But there was also a feeling of, this is a good first step. We need more. Where are you thinking of going with that? And is this something that you're talking about with the other chamber heads?
Well, this network, statewide network, just formed, and the first meeting we had in February was an organizing type meeting. We didn't get too deeply into policy issues, but we're intending to have that meeting in the coming month or so. So that said, in terms of where we, as the Boston Chamber, and I'm sure other business organizations will go with the issue of competitiveness and tax policy, we'll be up there, and we are up there on Beacon Hill advocating for some more specific and direct tax policy changes, single sales factor, for example, that would send a stronger signal to the business community that we get it. We get that, the game of competition among cities and states has changed. We get that Massachusetts is an outlier in so many areas of taxation, particularly on the business community. We need that signal from Beacon Hill right now, because I can tell you, people and businesses are getting phone calls on a daily basis trying to lure them to another state.
Is it primarily on a financial basis that, basically companies increasingly can work anywhere? Not all of them, but many of them. And is this financial basis of competition? Is that the primary thing?
Yeah, I think cost of living, cost of doing business. But as you said, Bruce, coming out of COVID, one of the big lessons learned and perhaps trends is this increased degree of mobility and flexibility of both people and businesses. People have accepted the fact that I can work in professional types of organizations, like underpins Massachusetts economy. I can start this business anywhere. So I'll look for what is the cost of doing business? What are the tax implications of opening in Massachusetts versus North Carolina versus Florida or Texas or Arizona? People are going to their accountants and their lawyers and saying, where would I best be positioned to do it? Now, there's other factors, and certainly one that we can lean on is that we still have a very talented workforce. We still, lead the nation in number of college graduates in our population. So we've got some strengths, but we need to develop that sales message, if you will, to accent those and to deal with the challenges. And most of the challenges are in cost. For the individual, it's cost of housing, cost of living. But for the businesses, it's cost of doing business.
So it seems like this is a discussion that has increased in volume, let's say, since the voters last November passed this tax on income over $1 million. That sort of seems to have spurred the business community and others to sort of say, that's sending the wrong message to business people, job creators, what have you. And at least I feel like that's when I've started to hear more about we're losing our competitive edge. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it's fair that has been the reaction that we and others have had. But beyond that, and back to sort of the formation of the network, that we're not being heard. That these are the kinds of things perhaps we've said maybe more diplomatically and maybe in meetings, that's just not being heard. Now, one of the things we didn't get into, Bruce, in terms of the network is that, when I go up to Beacon Hill, I'm able to say that I represent 1,300 businesses that employ hundreds of thousands of people. The collective network that I'm talking about, we're talking about statewide that we formed, represents 10,000 businesses employing millions of people. So when you have that sort of platform and representation from 10 groups covering every inch of the state, we think that platform's a much more visible and louder voice. It's a strategy to try to be heard more on the messages we're trying to deliver.
And it seems like the Governor Healy, is is listening to that message. But obviously, the vote last November to pass this new tax, that sent a message too, probably to political leaders, that there's a strong element in Massachusetts, in the electorate, that wants to see some shift in the way taxation is done. And they're not going away by any stretch of the imagination. So I guess it seems like it's going to become more of a battle, if you will. How do you see it?
Yeah, well, I hope battle's not the right word. I appreciate the choice, but first of all, with respect to the vote, it was, as you know, 52-48, and it was my diagnosis is that it was a tough fight, if you will, in that you ask a voter, do you want to spend more money on transportation and education and have someone else pay for it? I mean, that's easy. Of course, people are going to say yes to that. And it was a harder message for the opponents to dig down into the nuances. When you have to talk about the nuances of what's being voted, it's tough to do in a political environment when people start paying attention to candidates and ballot questions like 3 days before they're actually going to go into the voting vote. So I don't know, Bruce. I guess I'd quibble with the suggestion that there's a strong sentiment. I mean, 52-48 on a question like that, I think doesn't send as strong a signal as as some might like. But that being said, the impacts of that and other public policies, including tax policies that are taking hold in the Commonwealth, are going to result in our minds in a slow burn of going backwards, i.e. loss of population, business locations that don't happen here. And that's another difficult thing, the situation we're in, which is having to prove a negative. How do we prove that a business didn't locate here? That had the choice to come here, but chose North Carolina, South Carolina. How do we prove that? The way you do it is in data, but it's over time. So 5 years from now, we'll look back and say, gee, why aren't we getting as many of these startups? Why all these star scientists going to the research triangle and coming instead of coming to Boston? Why are all our industry still hunting for talent when Texas has got more and more people moving there? Those are the things that are going to start happening, and they're going to start happening slowly. And we just have an obligation, I think, to try to sound an alarm bell.
Sounding the alarm, you've got a good point about that, but I just exactly, I know you're this next month, you're going to be meeting to sort of develop a statewide agenda, I guess, on this type of issue and others. But what is it, if you were at that meeting, what are you going to be pushing for? I mean, you mentioned single sales factor. Why don't you explain a little bit about what that is and why that's needed? And any other things? Are you thinking about trying to repeal this thing that voters just passed? What's your agenda?
Well, starting with taxes, we published, and our cards are on the table. We published a tax package that includes a number of taxes on businesses that Massachusetts is an outlier. In some cases, we're among the only state or among the only states that tax business in this way. And what happened, Bruce, is that when the millionaires tax passed, people and businesses ran to their accountants and lawyers asking for advice on how to deal with it. And the good accountants and the good lawyers said, well, let's take a look at the entire picture. And they began to reveal to the business community and others that it's not just this millionaires tax. It's that's just one rock in the knapsack you're being asked to carry. There's a whole bunch of other fees and taxes that you're paying in Massachusetts that other states aren't paying. So I think that one of the outcomes of that vote was it awoke sleeping dogs, if you will, of different types of taxes. So that's one bucket of, what are we doing? How are we treating a startup, a person that wants to start his or her business in Massachusetts? How are we treating some of our anchor institutions with respect to what it costs to do business in Massachusetts? So that's one family. The other families of issues, Bruce, are the ones that you won't be surprised by. Transportation, housing, the approach to climate change, and how we're going to do that in a logical fashion. And all of the same kinds of public policy issues. I think our feeling is what's been missing is the perspective of employers at that table saying this is how it will affect our ability to conduct business and to sustain jobs and to grow. And that voice being heard. It's the same issues. It's really just the idea that rather than being spoken at, we want to be spoken with.
And is in this debate that's coming up, let's put it that way, this debate, is the governor on your side, or do you see her as someone you've got to convince in this regard?
Well, I wouldn't say on my side or the business community side. Look, she and any person in that role is the governor of the entire Commonwealth that needs to listen to the perspectives of all stakeholders and consider sort of balancing many, many issues. So we respect that. We get it. And, maybe I'm not doing a good job saying it, but I think what our feeling has been is that the perspective of the business community has been less listened to, broadly speaking, in state government in recent years than it needs to be. So I don't know that she's, I wouldn't say she's on our side. I would say that my experience with Attorney General Healy, and even in the early days, Governor Healy, has been a person who is willing to listen and understand the perspective of different stakeholders, including the business community. Let me give you one example, Bruce, of kind of one concern. So and you follow this, the governor's proposed budget, which will be in total numbers roughly what will come out of the House and Senate, is $55 billion. 5 years ago, that was $42 billion. That's a 31% increase in the state spending in 5 years. Highest rate of spending in history, certainly in yours and my lifetimes, I think, that the state spending has grown. If you look at that issue of fiscal responsibility, at the same time, we've grown the rainy day fund. But if you look at fiscal responsibility, that's a pretty rapid rate of growth in spending. If you look at results and accountability, where are we? We've got the T, we've got a housing crisis. So what did that all get us? We've got educational attainment that isn't what it needs to be. What did that all get us? And then the third bucket is this idea of inclusive economic growth. And, how do you grow the economy and jobs and keep people here and attract people and all of that? Over the 5 years where we found the ability to increase the spending by $13 billion, we've not found the ability to have one tax cut over that time. We've not found the ability to say, you know what, let's fix this. So clearly, if you look at that picture, the voice of business, commerce, economic growth is not being heard. That's just that's just the result. So,
and again, I guess I'm sort of coming back. When you go into this meeting,
you mean this meeting with the other chambers?
Yeah, with the other heads of the chambers.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm hearing you say, tell me if I'm wrong, is that you'll be looking at some reforms in tax policy, but it's a sort of a broader discussion too. It's not like, this tax or that tax. It's a whole general business climate discussion, which could encompass many things.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's all of what makes an economy, allows an economy to grow for the benefit of all, and I want to keep adding that because it's so much easier to create, equity when there's growth involved than when the pie is the same size or shrinking. So, we want to do that. And by the way, I mean, we didn't even talk about the geography of this. I would submit that Boston wins when the rest of the state is thriving. And, we need Massachusetts in its entirety to be viewed as a place where businesses of different types and functions of different types can start, can stay, and can succeed. We need businesses to choose Western Mass, Cape Cod, Fall River, New Bedford, the North Shore. We need businesses to decide to do manufacturing there, whatever else might fit in those places. And that helps Boston. And we also need a collective enterprise or approach to some of these public policy issues I talked about. I mean, not to dive too deeply into the housing crisis, but Boston's 48 square miles. It's not going to solve the housing crisis by itself. We need something that embraces the fact that, we're a relatively small state. We need to take advantage of housing inventory that exists in new growth and housing throughout the Commonwealth. We need to connect Western Mass to Eastern Mass by public transportation. So there's a lot of common ground on these public policy issues that are already at the table. And I go back to what I said before, which is what's missing in our perspective is from our perspective is either there's a lack of empathy or a lack of appreciation for the degree to which economic growth enables you to fix all the other things you want to fix. And, economic stagnation and lack of competitiveness makes it harder to fix all those things.
So one last thing, Jim. We are often fond in Massachusetts of talking about how Boston had, you just sort of said, there's a commonality, a common sense of interest between groups in Boston and around the state. But there's also divisions. What's important to you in Boston might be very different from what is important in the Berkshires or even Worcester or what have you. What kind of consistency or uniformity are you finding? Are you and your fellow leaders of the chambers of one mind on this, or is there some convincing to do?
I think we are more of one mind than people think. As one of the outcomes of creating a coalition like this is that we spend time together, and I learn more about the concerns on the ground of other regions of the state and what their priorities are. In fact, as part of this, we've agreed on an annual in-person meeting in the fourth quarter of each year to talk about just the public policy priorities going into the next year. So I think there already exists an appreciation among the business organizations for the challenges in different regions. But I think that's going to grow. And the other thing I'd say about the formation of a group like this is that a big advantage that a group like this has is that chambers are on the ground. They're in their communities. They know these issues better than anyone. I mean, Tim Murray in Worcester, he knows the issues in Worcester cold, and Diana out in Springfield, she knows Springfield issues better than anybody. Bringing that knowledge and that connective tissue within those communities together across the entire state, we think is powerful in terms of finding common ground on all of these issues. Look, you know, a good example of that, Bruce, is broadband access. You know, out in Western Massachusetts, there's the issue of physical access more than there is in Boston, clearly. But in Boston, there's probably some issues around affordability and adaptability. So we have common ground on access to broadband, but we have different sort of levels of problems with respect to access to broadband.
Well, I look forward to, as these talks develop, learning more about where you find that common ground and how you come out and making your voice heard on Beacon Hill. Jim, I want to thank you for joining us today. Jim Rooney, the President and CEO of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Bruce. Good to be here.
And to our listeners, we'll see you again next week.